Another great week of Behind the Brush as we paint the town right here in Southwest Florida, digging up all the great things that are happening on the canvas, behind the canvas, as we break out the brushes and paint it on for you. Rick Vasky, your host, along with my great friend Cesar Aguilera. Cesar, how are you, buddy?
Great. Another day in paradise.
It is,
painting
man.
the city.
I'll tell you what. We had a great show last week. I couldn't believe, even after we cut the mics last week, we had John and Hannah from FGCU, and we turned the mics off, and that's when we really got the real good stories, man. It always happens like before and after these shows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've been saying the whole time, we should have keep the mics on.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what, there's so much great things going on at FGCU. If you haven't been out there to the gallery, please get out, because the Morgan T. Payne, he stepped foot on that place in 1987. He changed the entire canvas as far as what they did in the art program there, and now it's time to raise our hats and raise our glasses to the man behind it all for so many years. And so get out there. His show's going on all month long, and I believe that opening is or was actually this week.
No, it's coming tomorrow night, Thursday.
Well,
yeah.
we are running this.
Well, whenever it's happening.
We'll edit that out.
Yeah.
So I believe that that already is happening this week. So make sure you get out there and support all those great things. And even you got into some great talks about one of the programs they have coming up with their murals. Mm-hmm. And the way that they are doing such great collaborations there, and bringing in the actual art community to tie it into the students and the next generation of what's happening out there. It was nice, once again, not that we don't honor all of what has built the art community in Southwest Florida, but the changing of the tide is upon us. We've talked about it last week. We have Juan, the new director of Art Fest. We have Devin taking over for Jim down at the Sidney Byrne Davis Art Center. Mm-hmm. We have
Neil from the Alliance.
Neil at the Alliance. Don't forget, they're going to be shut down for an entire month while they rehab everything there, and a brand new look to the Alliance for the Arts coming up in October. But a lot of great people that are behind the scenes here, bringing in a new generation, a fresh look of what is the art in Southwest Florida. So get out there anytime that you can. They have limited hours at the FGCU galleries there. And parking can be a little bit of a challenge, but you owe it to yourself to check out the next generation of art in Southwest Florida, because it all starts sometimes with the over 100 students there putting their creativity into the FGCU art program. This week, though, we got a great guest with great stories already. What happens before the mics and after the mics always is the fun of all of this. Mm-hmm. And I was like, hold on, save that for the show. Hold on, save that for the show. Hold on, let's just dive right in. Yeah. And Jade Dellinger, thank you so much for being here.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
And Jade, you're the director of the and I'm probably going to, I always butcher names, by the way.
It's okay.
The Bob Rauschenberg Gallery.
That's correct.
And,
at Florida Southwestern State College.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people know, but we're going to get into the history of who is Bob Rauschenberg.
Yeah.
But how about this? Let's start with, who is Jade Dellinger?
Ooh. Well, I'm a curator and director of the gallery. I've been at it for many years, actually, but I've been here in Southwest Florida for the last 12 years, working at the Bob Rauschenberg Gallery. I'm officially the director of exhibitions and collections, but that includes my responsibilities toward the Bob Rauschenberg Gallery, and really that's the reason I'm here. At the time that I was offered the job, I was an independent curator for about 20 years, and I was working really closely with the Tampa Museum of Art and the Contemporary Art Museum up in Tampa. And I traveled an exhibition down to the Bob Rauschenberg Gallery and curated a show for them. And that show, as it turns out, was focused on an artist that had a deep connection to Bob, a composer named John Cage. And with this Cage exhibition I did, a lot of the old Rauschenberg people came out. And it had actually been 4 years since Bob's death, and there really hadn't been Rauschenberg in the Bob Rauschenberg Gallery, and
Wow.
a lot of the folks that were deeply connected with him hadn't really been, showing up for things. So when I did this show related to John Cage, the director of the John Cage Trust at Bard College flew down. We did talks, created a lot of excitement, enthusiasm. A lot of the artists who I included in that show were, very popular. Yoko Ono was in that show. Yoko tweeted about the show. Iggy Pop. We had David Byrne. We had
Wow.
Jack White pressed records for this installation. It was like a pretty incredible and exciting thing that a lot, was sort of taking off. The band Devo participated in the show, and so I'd written a book about Devo, and we've since done projects with them. But as I brought this show down to Southwest Florida, I learned so much more about the incredible history here, the incredible history of the gallery. And then a few weeks later, I got a call from the then director, my predecessor at the gallery, saying, I've been here 14 years. I'm thinking about retiring. I know you're not looking for a job, but you've brought a certain energy to the place, and it would give you a venue. And prior to that, for 20 years, I would pitch shows. And I was doing shows again in Tampa, but also at the Contemporary Art Museum in Cincinnati, as we were talking about before, and in Europe and in Peru and in Mexico, and I was writing some books about music and things. But this gave me the chance to really again have a venue to be able to engage the artists I was interested in sort of engaging, all the while continuing to celebrate Bob Rauschenberg and his legacy, which is extraordinary.
Okay, that is a phenomenal background to get into this. That's I can't wait to even go even further back to this about the letter that you've written to him. But before we get to that, tell me a little bit, for those of the people that may be listening or maybe just only know a piece of the story, tell me more actually about the history and everything about Bob.
Yeah. So,
or Robert, as some people would say.
That's right. So, the name is an interesting story as well, because actually Bob Rauschenberg was he was born in Port Arthur, Texas, and years later, of course, after he'd done dozens of exhibitions here and world premiered some rather incredible seminal works at our little gallery, we had the opportunity to, use his name. He gave us Bob Rauschenberg as the name and did 3 exhibitions after the name. We had been named the Bob Rauschenberg Gallery. Before that, for decades, since 1979, we were the Gallery of Fine Arts at Edison College, or Edison Community College. We became the Bob Rauschenberg Gallery. When we were named the Bob Rauschenberg Gallery, in the local press, people wrote in furious that we were being so disrespectful, that we weren't calling it the Robert Rauschenberg Gallery. But in fact, he wanted us to have that informal version of the name. And the true story about his naming and his name as an artist was that he was born Milton Ernest Rauschenberg. And growing up and then in the Navy, everyone called him Milty or Ernie. And he hated both. He didn't like being called Milty or Ernie.
I could imagine.
So at an all-night Savarin diner in Kansas City, when he began to study art at the Kansas City Art Institute, he stayed up all night in the diner and drinking coffee and made an informal list of names. Pete, not Peter, John, not Jonathan, Bill, not William, Bob, not Robert. And when they finally booted him out in the morning, he circled Bob, and that became his art name.
I love it.
So for us, he truly was giving us his art name, and his foundation, which is the $2 billion foundation in New York, is the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation. But because everyone knew him here as Bob, he wanted us to have that part of his legacy.
I love it. What a great story. I bet not a lot of people even know that story. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Sure.
And tell me this, as you are doing and you're curating shows and you're putting on, you're even doing road shows.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot that goes behind this. There's 3 to 4 shows that you're doing a year at this. At
minimum, yeah. We've done many more at various times. And then, as you're saying, we've occasionally traveled shows. I tend to be most interested in sort of doing things that, if you build it, they will come. The idea that if we make a really significant show that resonates broadly beyond even the local community, that we have people that'll fly in from Switzerland for our openings. I mean, it's kind of crazy sometimes, but we're also working often with internationally renowned artists and getting them more often than not, because we have some leverage having Bob's name that and a long history of relationships, of course, too. But we can often get them to make site-specific installations and projects. So they'll make something for us that they've not made before, that is sort of inspired by our context, and that is something that curators in Japan might want to come see and travel to see. But at the same time, occasionally, when last we did a Rauschenberg show, we traveled that show. And kind of thoughtfully traveled it. He went to the Kansas City Art Institute. He went to Black Mountain College up near Asheville, and there is now a Black Mountain College museum up in Asheville. And so when we did our last Rauschenberg show, we traveled it up to the Black Mountain College Museum, a solo Rauschenberg show. And because we were able to make this exhibition, sadly, with the death of one of his former assistants, sort of his gatekeeper, actually, Bradley Jeffries, upon her unexpected passing, we realized that she owned 40 Rauschenbergs that no one had ever seen.
Wow.
And so we worked with her family, and we organized this solo show that was about Bob's generosity. It was about his gift giving, and specifically to her, but even more broadly. And she actually was an alumnus of the University of Kentucky in Lexington. So we traveled the show also to the Art Museum at the University of Kentucky up in Lexington. So it wasn't just, whoever might take this show. I literally called my friend, the director at the University of Kentucky Art Museum, and said, one of your alums has just passed, and she owned incredible things by Bob Rauschenberg, and he had juggled his schedule to make this exhibition fit. And with Black Mountain College, I've been asked at various times not only to bring and to do and to give lectures related to Rauschenberg, but I did a rather significant John Cage exhibition there. We had all just been inspired by a book that had come out talking about Rauschenberg's history, talking about John Cage's history in relationship to Buddhism, and they were very influenced by Zen Buddhism. So I did a show that was called Don't Blame It on Zen, The Way of John Cage and Friends, for Black Mountain College's museum up in Asheville. And then that show traveled. It never came here, actually, but we sent it to the Museum of Contemporary Art in Jacksonville. So, yeah.
Phenomenal. But let me ask you this, just in the fact of that people were upset even by the name, that it should have been Robert, right, and not Bob. Do you ever find the pressure of when you're putting on an actual show, or you're putting on something that's even outside the box, or integrating other art? Do you find that pressure from, I guess you would say, the fans, or from the people that are trying to? Where do you draw the line of actually moving things forward and yet holding the integrity of the actual form?
For me, it's I'm so both passionate about the things that I think both are important and have been around long enough that I have a sense of context. I mean, Bob, there's no argument, is part of the canon of art history. The art critic Jerry Saltz has said he's not a giant of American art. He is the giant of American art. And I would argue, and I think Jerry Saltz would too, that, Bob was the most important and influential artist internationally of the second half of the 20th century. And he lived until 17 years ago when he passed. But so whenever, anything that we do that kind of connects to Bob or is influenced by Bob, a lot of the artists that we're working with, they understand deeply, profoundly how significant even working in this context is, because essentially, to give you more of the backstory on Rauschenberg, I mean, he was world-renowned before moving to Florida, and he bought his first property on Captiva, his beach house, very modest house, in 1968. He moved there permanently in 1970. He owned buildings in New York. One of the paintings from this period from 1964 to give you some sense of it. A painting called Buffalo 2 sold at auction 6 or 7 years ago for $89 million. Wow. I mean, they're books and books. His last retrospectives were at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco, and the Tate Gallery. The Guggenheim's about to have another solo show in New York City. I mean, Rauschenberg, his influence is huge, and his relationship to us and to this community really started with both discovering, falling in love with Captiva. He had come in the late 1950s. He assigned himself the task of illustrating Dante's Inferno. And so he was dyslexic, right? So it was a kind of an extraordinary task for him. And at some point in 2 years of trying to work on this project, he decided that he needed some isolation, and he made his way down the Gulf Coast, and he stopped on Treasure Island up near St. Pete, Clearwater and stuff. He found a guy who was about to knock down this building. It was a fisherman's wharf. He convinced him that if he paid him a little bit of money, he'd allow him to stay, and he stayed for about 6 months illustrating Dante's Inferno. So Bob would always joke later that in order to find paradise, he had to go through hell coming to Florida. And later, the story that most people don't know is that while a lot of his friends were going through psychotherapy and in the mid-60s, and he was having some difficulty because in 64, he finds real fame in a way, and he wins the most important art festival in the world. Since the 19th century, more than 100 years, there has been this biennial every 2 years in Venice, Italy. And it's a big thing. In countless countries, Ecuador has a pavilion, thinking of Cesar here, the United States has a pavilion. You put forth the best art for your country, sort of nationalistically. And in 1964, Rauschenberg became the youngest artist ever and the first American, after all of those years, decades, to win the Venice Biennale. He won the Golden Lion.
Wow. And
so then, as he came back to New York, he was a bit distraught. I mean, he was always about changing everything that he did. When he won the Golden Lion, he called back to his studio in New York and had his assistants destroy all the screens for making his paintings, because he didn't want to go back and have it be easy for him to continue to make the work that he was making. He wanted to have to go back and be challenged to do something entirely different. So in coming back, though, and being in New York, friends were in psychotherapy. He instead went to an astrologer, this guy Zoltan Mason, and had his star charts done. Huh. And in doing the star charts, what Zoltan Mason told him was, you need to stay away from the mountains, and you need to find a place that's sort of beachfront or at least coastal. And so at the time, because of his fame, he had met a collector who had just bought this really sexy white Jaguar automobile. And she took him for a ride, and Bob fell in love with the car. And this collector said, well, if you love this car so much, hey, we should work something out. Like, I like it too, but I'd love to have one of your paintings. And so Bob traded a painting for the car and started making these East Coast trips south, trying to find a beachfront home. And that's how he gets to Captiva. Captiva at the time was so isolated, there wasn't a bridge. You had to take the ferry to get to Captiva. And he was in demand, having shows all over the world. So he'd have to go to Tampa or Miami to get a flight. And he was trying to make larger and larger scale art. So through the 70s, he has a tiny little studio in this little beachfront house. Later, he built a rock star studio with an elevator that could bring the car up into the studio. But it's really, we fall into this at this perfect moment because we build this Humanities Hall in 1979, and the powers that be at the college thought, we want this to be the first climate-controlled, high-security, proper art space in Southwest Florida, which it became. And the way that they knew to do that was to approach the Smithsonian Institute in Washington.
Yeah.
And they had at this time, and still do, a program called SITES, which stands for Smithsonian Institute Traveling Exhibitions. And if you were SITES qualified, you could take shows from our national collection, like really important things that were already curated exhibitions that would come to
And
you,
make
and
it
you
mobile.
you could host them, right?
Yeah.
So they became SITES qualified. They organized the first couple of exhibitions coming from the Smithsonian to Southwest Florida. I mean, unheard of. And they reached out to Bob. And Bob took an interest. He agreed to make a solo exhibition in our inaugural season. He designed posters. He designed benefit prints. They sold those, paid for the next couple of years of programming, and he started using the place as a laboratory. It allowed him not to have to deal with the New York art elite. He could take whatever he was working with in the studio and premiere it in front of students and staff and faculty and the community in a way that was important both to him and certainly to the community. You know.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a great way that he just not only just decided to just randomly pick this spot, but really actually put the footprint of art into this community long before he even realized what the ripple effect would be and the connections that he made to a lot of great funding.
As well, and as much as we celebrate again Thomas Edison, like I would argue that the impact of Bob Rauschenberg globally is immense. I mean, it's really, and it's one of the things that I've tried to do in my 12 years of being here is to do regular exhibitions that have been Rauschenberg specific, and then lots of exhibitions, even like the current one we have, which we could talk about, but that are taking inspiration, extending the legacy in some meaningful way. His impact, the first Rauschenberg show I did was 5 years after his death. I got here 4 years after his death. There hadn't been a Rauschenberg in the Rauschenberg Gallery, and I thought it was important to talk about his global impact. So I did a show that focused on his time in China. And Bob in the 80s, when he was in a position to have had, any major corporation, Coca-Cola or Pepsi or anything, or the United States Department of State support his travels, he decided that he wanted to go to places in the world that were hard for Americans to travel to. He wanted to do a person-to-person exchange, and he wanted to do it on his own dime. So he sold his art collection, including a Warhol, including his Magritte, including, a number of important things to raise millions of dollars. And then he announced on the General Assembly floor of the United Nations that he was going to make a world tour of his art and to connect with people in these dictatorial and or authoritarian regimes, these countries. He became the first Western contemporary artist to have a solo show at the major museums in the Soviet Union at the time, and then to China, from China to Tibet. He did it in Chile under Pinochet. He went to Mexico when it was difficult to go there. He went to Cuba, made a solo exhibition in Cuba. Fidel invited him to the beach house. I mean, he was doing all of this without talking politics, but it was about peace and using art in a way that was meaningful. And his influence, I mean, as little in some ways as some still know him even locally, or the importance of him as person, artist, etc. I've talked to Ai Weiwei, I've talked to Su Bing, some of these very important Chinese artists who generationally were around, and they'll say there was art in China before and after Rauschenberg.
Wow. He made a global impact.
Huge.
Yeah. And decided to take a world tour when that was not exactly something that any independent thinking artist would even challenge themselves to do. Yeah,
and to again go to places that were really difficult to go to, and without the State Department's involvement, or without so to get to Moscow at the time, and I went to Moscow during the Soviet period, but to get there, he had to work with Armand Hammer, who helped him have access, and it's now another moment for us to both celebrate him because, October 22nd, he will have turned 100. So we're going to be spending this next year. He died again 17 years ago, but this year...
This would have been his 100th birthday.
Yeah, so this is the centennial year, centennial celebrations, and I can assure you this will happen globally. I mean, already, and we're not there yet, right? So we've got through 2026, but already the Ringling Museum up in Sarasota has a Rauschenberg show. So I was just there a few weeks ago to give a Rauschenberg lecture in their context. Last weekend, I was at the Museum of Contemporary Art up in Jacksonville giving a lecture because they have a centenary honoring Rauschenberg exhibition. I just was at the last week at the Orlando Museum of Art, and they too are going to pull together a Rauschenberg show and bring me to give talks. It's happening, though, all over the world. I mean, because his impact was that. I mean, it was really global. He would always say, and it's the first thing that I put on my email when I became the director here, he would say, Fort Myers is as small as your mind is. It can be as large as the world is. And again, this is a guy who traveled the world, but for us and for all of us in the arts community, the idea that you can do something locally, but it can resonate broadly. It can have an impact globally. And whenever I'm curating shows, and you were asking about that, I'm always thinking about. I'm not just thinking about the local. I'm thinking about the way in which this connects with things that are happening in and around the world. We show international artists. We bring artists from around the world, and we're fortunate in that with our history with Bob, we can engage people that otherwise might not be coming to Southwest Florida.
Yeah. Phenomenal. I mean, it's just amazing, again, not only how lucky we are right here in our own backyard to have the actual footprint of everything that he's done, but to be able to go celebrate it. And now, what a great way to honor him on his 100th birthday, as if it were...
October 22nd, I guess we'll break news here. I've just helped to sort of edit the proclamation, but October 22nd in Fort Myers will be Bob Rauschenberg Day. Oh. So the mayor is going to make a proclamation, and we'll be doing lots of related events. And we have a current show in the gallery that I think pays tribute to him too. But yeah, you're the first to hear.
I think that my way of celebrating him would just to be go out and have a drink at the Monkey Duck, even though they're renovating it right now. Yeah. I think I just go sit right on the beach right there and pour a drink.
I'm with you.
And so, speaking of which, let's go back to that fun story because he attended the Mucky Duck and supported the place many times.
Yeah. So well, a lot of old friends would say he preferred sort of where the Green Flash was, and that was I forget the name of what it was prior to the Green Flash, but it was for a time the kind of bar and or restaurant situation that like all the fishermen would pull their boats up to, and then they'd cook whatever was coming off the boat, and he preferred sitting with locals and having a real conversation to anything that was fancy. So that said, the Mucky Duck was though what was mentioned as we were talking about before we came on the air. I had a great grandfather who was a famous baseball player. I grew up around famous baseball players, and when he was in his 90s, he had cataracts. He was in great physical shape otherwise. And I think actually this is the story that probably got me the job here.
And by the way, this is a very famous baseball player with the Cincinnati Reds.
His name was Eddie Rausch. Yeah.
And he carried the biggest bat in baseball. He swung the club.
Ever. Yeah, 48 ounces. And he went into the Baseball Hall of Fame with Jackie Robinson in 1962.
The only thing that Caesar knows about 48 ounces is all the beers when he has two of them in two hands, right? But imagine your 48 ounces in a baseball bat form for just a moment.
Well, my granddad would put back a few too. But what we would do together when I was a teenager, and he lived until I was almost 20, was because he had cataracts, he couldn't really read all the fan mail that would show up every week. So he was wintering really down in Bradenton, and I would come, growing up north of Tampa, but I would come down to visit, and we would go through his fan mail on the weekends, and I would read the fan letters. He would sign autographs. And it was amazing to me because you'd see all these really creative letters that would come, and you could tell if it was an autograph dealer who just wanted a dozen baseballs signed, or if it was like someone really sincerely, asking questions and or wanting a signature for whatever reason. So I would help him with the fan mail, but also I never really, of course, growing up around Yogi Berra and Mickey Mantle and Joe DiMaggio and all these people, cared about baseball. I played soccer all my life. But I started to get interested in art, and my mother actually clipped an article that was a local article about Rauschenberg. And he, again, by then, the early to mid 80s, was world renowned. This was, though, something where the reporter, the journalist, followed him for the day. And they would talk about how, he sleeps late, and then, at 1 or 2, as he's, making his way, spend some time on the beach. The studio is being prepped by his assistants. He would often go walk the beach, couple of 100 yards, frankly, down to what was then, and they said by name, the Mucky Duck Pub, and he'd have a drink and watch the sunset and then go to work all night. And so in reading that and seeing all these creative letters that would come to my granddad, I thought, I'm going to write Bob Rauschenberg a fan letter. Like, I don't need Mickey Mantle's signature. I can see him anytime. But with that, I thought I took the lessons that I'd learned in reading my granddad's mail. And so I wrote this letter knowing that, had I written to Rauschenberg, care of Leo Castelli Gallery in New York City, there would be gatekeepers. Maybe it'd get to the studio. It'd be the New York studio. Maybe it'd get forwarded down to Captiva. Who knows? And instead, I decided, and I looked up where the Mucky Duck was. And I wrote to Mr. Robert Rauschenberg, care of the Mucky Duck Pub, and a very sincere letter. And my thought was, of course, he's going to come into the Mucky Duck, and Victor, the owner at the time, would hand him his mail and make a joke that he's here way too often.
Yes.
So and I am so certain that that's what happened, because then, as he read my letter, and I'd read also that he was a big drinker, I ended it with a P.S. enclosed as $10. Let me buy you a drink.
Brilliant.
And to that he clearly resonated. He responded within a couple of weeks. There was a knock at our front door, and my mother yells to me, what did you buy or order? Or so the postman's here. You have to sign for it. And it was a big tube, and it was canceled Captiva. And I knew what it was as soon as I saw, and I opened it, and there was a lithograph. Bob had just come back from China, actually.
Wow.
And he had made these exhibitions in China. He signed this lithograph for Jade, Bob Rauschenberg, and then there was a handwritten note. These are the first things I put on my wall when I became the director of the gallery, of course, but a handwritten note that said, I'll have that drink and wish you luck just before I go to work tonight. I put a gift in your pocket. Best RR.
Wow. What a phenomenal story. And it's bravo to you. Honestly, bravo. Hats off. Because not only did you have the passion for it, in that you had the desire to it, you've made it to such an amazing place in all of this. In all of your stories, you're actually truly passionate for what you're doing. You're carrying on an amazing legacy. You're doing a phenomenal job, and you deserve everything that's coming towards you in the seat that you are in. And bravo to you.
I'm
honestly.
very grateful, to have this opportunity, actually, and feel honored to, again, be in a position to help extend his legacy.
I love these stories, and but let's dive in a little bit here right now. Currently, there's a downsized version of the actual gallery between the Barbara B. Mann and the library, right off College Parkway here. And so we have a little bit of a downsized version of the gallery going on right now.
So our gallery, again, was built in 1979, and again, during Bob's lifetime, he did lots and lots of shows there. We were doing very regular exhibitions there, and in my 12 years, I must say we've always found ways to alter the space. We've had artists that have come, and they've a New York artist named Keith Edmeyer decided he wanted to build Thomas Edison swimming pool to scale in the building, in the gallery, as an immersive experience. So when you walked into the room, it was thousands of pounds of cementitious material, and it was all the railing and metal. And so, but minimally, with every show that I've done, even in 12 years, and certainly my predecessor too.
I remember that exhibition is mind-blowing.
You do?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Yeah. It was an amazing show. But we've always at least painted the walls. So since I've been here, I've put 40 coats of paint on the walls.
Oh,
I mean,
God.
truly. And And so we are in need of a facelift. And so we've been lucky that our building K was done. We got money from the state to do that. And then building L is our Humanities Hall, and the gallery occupies about a fourth of that, the building's larger dimensions. But we received money from the state this time through to do a $14 million renovation of the entirety of Building L, which has meant that our black box theater has been out, the music department, painting, drawing, etc. Everybody's out, including the gallery. And the gallery, the benefit of all of this ultimately is we'll get a fairly decent renovation. We'll have new walls, we'll have new floors.
$14 million is fairly decent?
Well, I mean, for the whole building, it's still, of course,
Yeah, of course.
But it, the hope is that we'll end up with, new lighting and security and,
you get a lot
all
done for that, for sure.
I hope so. Yeah. And the sad part of this is that we're out then for 2 years of this renovation, but I'm delighted to report that we have then and opened just as we were closing in the summer, our last exhibition in the Rauschenberg Gallery proper, an annex space. And it's much smaller. It's a quarter of the size, but we've built beautiful walls, and it's painted and lighting and high-tech security, all the things that one would need to be able to continue with our programming in the way that we have. It'll just be a smaller footprint. And so we have now, as our fall exhibition, a show of a Brooklyn-based artist who we showed in 2018, actually. He has been working since the late 80s, early 90s on a kind of painting project that's a larger project. As a grad student at Yale University, Steve was friends with all these actually musicians and kind of guys that became rock stars. Stephen Malkmus. He has been collected in more recent years by Michael Stipe and by Cat Power and by Devo, and all kinds of people are taking interest in his work. But at the time, he would go to his friends' shows, in local clubs and stuff, and he was always jealous that they could sell a CD for $5. And he would work for months in the studio, and then the thought of having to ask hundreds, if not thousands of dollars for something he spent that much time in making and doing.
Right.
He decided as a grad student that he was going to start making assembly line paintings. And the whole idea was to cheap materials, plywood that he could get inexpensively, cutting plywood panels and using house paint, and then doing 10 or 20 or 50 pictures at a time in repetition as in a sort of assembly line approach. But with the larger idea, and of course they're individually signed, and he would take them to his friend's shows, to Steve Malkmus's shows, and he'd sell them for $10 when they were selling CDs,
Yeah.
And over time, by the 1990s, by 1997, he got featured in Time magazine. He did album covers for Apples and Stereo and for Pavement, and worked with Dave Matthews, worked with all kinds of people, gets featured in Time magazine. He's having solo exhibitions where at, for example, the Santa Monica Museum, he's given a solo show. He says, great, I want to live there for 2 months. I want to paint in public view as a kind of performance. During the 2-month period, he made 10,000 paintings.
In 2 months?
In 2 months. Jeez. And he sold them all. People would come. It was limit 2. You couldn't walk out with 10 paintings. You give him $20, you walk out with 2 paintings. And he made and sold 10,000 paintings. Since that period, over these years, Steve has made almost 400,000 paintings.
Wow.
I kid you not. He's been featured in Time magazine, of course, the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, et cetera, et cetera. We worked with him in 2018. The first exchange I had with him actually...
My mind can't even fathom.
It's hard to wrap your brain around.
Is there something like the Guinness Book of Record that can...
Yeah, oh, for sure. He probably is, actually. I've never asked him that.
I mean, I own a T-shirt screen printing company.
Yeah.
Right? And I could screen one shirt
Yeah.
right? And do another one and another one and another one and another one. That's screen printing.
Yeah.
And I still don't even know if I
Can't
can touch
imagine
those numbers.
that you've done 500,000 shirts.
Right.
Yeah, in the last 40 years. It's truly incredible. And he thinks of himself, Time Magazine called him the assembly line Picasso. But he thinks of himself really as like the Johnny Appleseed of art. I mean, for him, like I thought he'd take offense, but when we had him here in 2018, he came for 10 days. He made a 248 foot by 8 foot high work on 62 panels in the gallery,
Wow.
inspired by Rauschenberg's quarter mile or 2 furlong piece, which is a piece that Bob envisioned in the early 1980s to reach a quarter mile. Bob's ended up reaching almost a half a mile, but it was world premiered in our gallery in 3 parts over 3 years as Rauschenberg made it.
I remember that one too. Really good exhibition.
Yeah. Well, so Steve, finding inspiration in that, decided that he would make this extended work, and it covered all the walls, but it also covered the floors. And when you arrived over this 10-day period, you could watch him work. He didn't like being interrupted. He would continue to paint, and even at the opening, he painted through the opening. But because we had this deep relationship, and actually my first connections with him, it's a good story. My first connection with him was 25 years ago. I wrote the first ever book about the band Devo. And it was with a British publisher, and I brought Mark Mothersbaugh, the lead singer of Devo, who's also an artist, to Florida in the late 1990s to do a project at the Contemporary Art Museum in Tampa. We've worked with him since, have done shows. We also did the Devo retrospective 2 years ago in 2023, because it was their 50th anniversary. But with Devo, as I was writing this first book, I had done so many interviews with people in their circle, with the band, with Iggy Pop, with, on and on. And I wanted to find a way, other than simply giving a book to everyone who had contributed, to give something special. The Santa Monica show had happened. He had done those 10,000 paintings, and I learned that the guys from Devo had been showing up regularly and buying paintings, that they loved Steve's work. So I flew up to Brooklyn to sit down with Steve to take him to lunch, and I said to him, have you ever done the first album cover, Devo's first album cover, as a painting? Like, could I commission you to make 50 paintings of Devo's first album cover, and I'm going to send them to everyone who contributed, including the band, with a copy of the book as it comes out, right? So he says, absolutely, love to do it. And he says, I say, we've got a few months, take your time. A week or two later, I get a call from him, and he says, the paintings are on their way.
Wow.
And keep an eye out. And in fact, you need to be there when they're delivering them. And I was like, oh, okay, well, how many boxes, how much? And UPS comes, they start unloading boxes. And I'm going like, wow, that's a lot of boxes. And when I opened this thing up, I had commissioned him $10 a painting to do 50 paintings. I wrote over lunch in Brooklyn, gave him a $500 check plus shipping. I don't know, I gave him $600 or something. So I get these boxes, I open these boxes, and there's a letter from Steve on the top saying, thanks so much for the commission. I love that we're doing this, and I always like to over-deliver. He sent me 500 Devo paintings. I kid you not. 500 Devo paintings.
You get them for $1 a piece.
Isn't that nuts? So strategic though on his part, because knowing I'm a curator, I've given them over the years to lots of important curators and rock stars and people that I've had exchanges with. So it was a good strategy, and I've also invited him. So with the centenary, full circle to now, this show that's going to run through December 6th is his Rauschenberg 100, a centennial celebration. And what Steve decided to do was to make 100 paintings in Bob Rauschenberg's honor.
Phenomenal.
So we have 100 paintings in the gallery that tell Bob's history, tell his whole story. And they're extraordinary.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That goes through December 6th.
It does.
Unbelievable. And you got a traveling road show coming up as well?
Well, the show that we did last in the Rauschenberg Gallery and kind of first in the Bob Rauschenberg Gallery Annex was 2 shows, really. One called Propagation and one based on the 7 Deadly Sins with the famous beat author and artist William S. Burroughs and an artist named David Bradshaw. Remarkably, most have no idea of this, but David Bradshaw was the first artist that Bob Rauschenberg invited to Captiva when he moved there. So David would come for visits in the very early 70s and was working there side by side with Bob. And then William S. Burroughs, who is a controversial but important figure, wrote the book Naked Lunch. The recent movie with Daniel Craig, based on the book Queer, is a book by William Burroughs, Queer, and so there's so many connections with Burroughs. Burroughs is in a U2 video in the 1980s. He influenced Patti Smith and Sonic Youth. He's on the cover of the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's album. The term heavy metal comes from William Burroughs. There are like all these interesting music connections. Kurt Cobain was a huge fan, etc. Anyway, we did some shows related to these two artists, and then that we are sort of combining and curating, scaling a bit for Santa Fe College up in Gainesville for their art gallery. So that's opening, September 12th.
Yeah, wow. You're staying busy, my friend. Well, listen, Jade Dellinger, thank you so much for getting behind the brush, because these are some of the greatest stories that I think we've had on this microphone here. And the depth of it, Cesar, would you like to add anything? Anything that's been on your mind? You've been waiting to ask anything?
I think, like you're saying, Rauschenberg being such a big influence in the area. I know a few artists that used to work in his studio locally, and just the amount of stories that you hear is like he was a phenomenal person. Yes. Yeah. So it would be such a honor to having met him, you know.
Yeah. Well, October 22nd, get out and at least
celebrate Bob.
Celebrate.
Have a
Bob.
drink.
And who knows? All around Southwest Florida, you might be running into a celebration because he deserves it. That's for sure. RauschenbergGallery.com. You can find it over on College Parkway, in between the Barber B Man and the library, Monday through Saturday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Jade Dellinger, thank you so much for getting behind the brush.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys. Great.
We're going to keep painting the town, and you can go to beyondthebrush.art and find out about all this stuff. We will link the gallery right there along with all the great shows, and you keep painting the town, and we will keep diving behind the brush.